It's the final night of 1775, the last hour of a year that has already seen Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, and the Siege of Boston. But here, hundreds of miles to the north, the American Revolution is about to gamble everything on a single, desperate assault. The wind is screaming down the narrow streets of Quebec. Snow is blowing sideways, stinging the faces of the men marching behind General Richard Montgomery. Their coats are frozen stiff. Their muskets barely fire in the cold. And somewhere ahead of them, hidden in the darkness, a British cannon awaits. Montgomery steps forward. A flash, a roar, and in an instant, the entire American invasion of Canada begins to collapse. But to understand why Americans were here at all, in a foreign city in the dead of winter, launching a midnight assault in the middle of a blizzard, we have to go back. Because the story of Quebec isn't just a battle. It's a story of ambition, fear, hope, heroism, disease, and tragedy. And it begins with a question that seems almost impossible today. Why did the Continental Congress believe that Canada, yes, Canada, should be the 14th colony? Hello, history friends. Welcome back to my channel, Historical USA. I am your host, historian Lisa Weekland, and today we are digging into the disastrous invasion of Canada and the Battle of Quebec. You're going to see a lot of familiar faces in this episode. Now buckle up, because the invasion of Canada was one of the most ambitious undertakings of the Continental Congress. And we're going to learn just how disastrous it was. Now, when we talk about the American Revolution, we often imagine the conflict running north to south, Boston to New York to Philadelphia. But in 1775, the Continental Congress was thinking in every direction. In the north, the corridor running from the St. Lawrence River down through Lake Champlain and into the Hudson Valley was one of the most strategically important routes in the continent. The British had used it for generations. The French had used it before them. And the Americans feared that the British would use it again. So Congress made a decision. If the revolution was going to survive, it had to secure Canada. And they said so directly.
We have taken up arms in defense of our liberty. We invite you to join with us in this struggle.
Now, they weren't asking politely. They were hoping, maybe even expecting, that the French Canadians would rise up and join the rebellion. After all, the British had only taken Quebec from France 16 years earlier. Surely the Canadians would prefer independence to British rule. But there was another reason, one far more urgent. If the British held Quebec, they could send an army straight down the St. Lawrence, through Lake Champlain, and into the heart of New York. They could split New England from the rest of the colonies. They could crush the rebellion before it ever truly began. Historian Mark Anderson puts it bluntly. He writes, "The invasion of Canada was not a sideshow. It was an attempt to secure the northern flank of the revolution, or lose it entirely." So, Congress authorized a two-pronged invasion. One force under General Richard Montgomery would move north from New York and take Montreal. The other, led by a fiery, ambitious officer named Benedict Arnolds, would march through the Maine wilderness and strike Quebec from the east. Two armies, two routes, one goal: take Quebec before the British could reinforce it. And if they succeeded, well, the revolution might gain a 14th colony. The British northern threat would disappear, and the war, at least in theory, could be won before it really truly began. But if they failed, well, that's the story I'm about to tell you. Because the road to Quebec was not a road at all. It was a nightmare of rivers, mountains, starvation, disease, and snow. And the men who marched it, Arnold, Morgan, Montgomery, Burr, would be changed forever. When we talk about the American invasion of Canada, most people jump straight to the snowstorm assault on Quebec. But honestly, the story that deserves just as much attention, maybe even more, is the march that came before it. Because Benedict Arnold didn't just lead a force north, he led them into a wilderness that barely had a name. In September of 1775, Arnold set out from Cambridge with more than 1,000 men. These were riflemen, infantry, carpenters, blacksmiths, and a handful of guides. Their mission was simple: cut through the Maine wilderness, descend the Chandri River, and strike Quebec from the east while Montgomery approached from the west. But their maps were wrong. The distances were wrong. The rivers were wrong. And the weather, well, the weather was merciless. Historian James Kirby Martin calls Arnold's march one of the most grueling expeditions in the entire Revolutionary War. And he's not exaggerating. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. The bateau, the wooden boats built to carry supplies, leaked constantly. Soldiers spent hours bailing water just to keep their food and gunpowder from sinking to the bottom of the Kennebec River. Then came the portages, miles of dragging heavy boats over slippery rocks and through dense forests. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Food spoiled. Horses died. And the wilderness swallowed everything. One soldier, Ensign Henry Dearborn, left us a vivid account of the suffering. He wrote,
"Our provisions are reduced to almost nothing. Many of the men are weak and faint for want of sustenance. Some have eaten their dogs."
Dogs. They were eating their dogs. And still Arnold pushed forward. By late October, the situation was desperate. The men were starving. Their clothes were in tatters. Many were barefoot. And the Chandri River, which they had hoped would carry them swiftly toward Quebec, turned out to be a violent, rapid-filled torrent. Boats capsized, supplies vanished, men drowned. Dearborn wrote again,
"We are in a most deplorable condition. Many of the men can scarcely stand."
And yet somehow Arnold kept them moving. He walked at the front. He shared the same rations, or lack of rations, as his men. He refused to turn back. See, but this is the Benedict Arnold most Americans never learn about. Not the traitor, not the villain, but the relentless, determined officer who inspired loyalty through sheer force of will. Historian Stephen Brumley puts this well. In 1775, Arnold emboldened the aggressive spirit of the revolution. His men followed him because he never asked to endure anything he would not endure himself. Here's what I want you to sit with for just a second. See, these men, barefoot, starving, barely able to walk, they still haven't seen a single British soldier yet. Everything you just heard happened before the battle, before the blizzard, before the cannons. And the man leading them through it, the relentless, driven officer who refused to let them quit, he'll be shot down in the streets before this battle is over. By early November, the expedition was on the brink of collapse. Hundreds had turned back. Dozens had died. The survivors were gaunt, hollow-eyed, and barely able to walk. Arnold made the agonizing decision to send the weakest men back. He pressed on with the rest, fewer than 700 now. And finally, after nearly a month in the wilderness, they reached the first French-Canadian settlement along the Chandri. The Canadians were shocked. These men looked like ghosts. But the Canadians fed them, clothed them, helped them to recover. And Arnold, wasting no time, pushed forward toward Quebec. On November 13th, 1775, Arnold's ragged force reached the Plains of Abraham, the same ground where the British had defeated the French 16 years earlier. Arnold marched his men up to the walls of Quebec and demanded the city surrender. The British commander, Governor Guy Carleton, didn't even bother to reply. He simply closed the gates. And that was that. Arnold had reached Quebec, but he didn't have the numbers to take it. Not yet. So he waited and watched and held his fragile position until Montgomery could arrive from Montreal. But the march had changed everything. Arnold's men were exhausted, supplies were low, and winter was coming. The British were preparing. Still, Arnold had done the impossible. He had brought an army through the wilderness. He had reached Quebec. And for a moment, just a moment, he was the hero. Now, while Benedict Arnold was recovering from the wilderness, and his men were trying to regain their strength, another American force was moving steadily north. General Richard Montgomery had already done what many thought impossible. He had captured Montreal without firing a single shot. Now, Montgomery was everything the Continental Army needed in 1775. He was experienced, he was calm, beloved by his men, and deeply aware of the stakes. And to his wife, Janet, with a mixture of hope and dread, he wrote,
"My dearest life, the severity of the season increases, and the difficulties of my situation grow upon me. Yet I must push forward."
That line, "I must push forward," tells you everything about him. Montgomery knew that Quebec was the key. He knew the British would reinforce it in the spring, and he knew he had only one chance to take the city. So he marched through snow, through freezing rain, through the early Canadian winter. And with him came a young officer who would one day become one of the most controversial figures in American history, Aaron Burr. But we will come back to Burr soon. Montgomery reached the outskirts of Quebec in early December. And when he finally met Arnold, the contrast between the two forces was striking. Montgomery's men were relatively well supplied, they were well clothed, and they were organized. Arnold's men, however, looked like they had survived a shipwreck. But Montgomery didn't hesitate. He embraced Arnold. He praised the men who had survived the march, and he immediately began planning for an assault. For the first time, the Americans had a unified force outside Quebec. But they still had an enormous problem. See, the British were well fortified. The walls were high and they were strong. The garrison was growing. The winter was tightening its grip. Still, Montgomery believed that the city could be taken if they struck quickly. This is where Daniel Morgan really steps into this story. See, Morgan was already a legend among frontier fighters, a man who had survived flogging, wilderness campaigns, the brutal reality of frontier warfare. He commanded a company of riflemen who were some of the best marksmen in the Continental Army. But Morgan, he wasn't polished, he wasn't refined, but he was absolutely fearless. As one of his riflemen later wrote, Captain Morgan feared nothing walking on two legs. Morgan had marched with Arnold through the wilderness. He had carried starving men on his back. He kept discipline when everything around him was falling apart. And now Montgomery and Arnold planned their assault. Morgan became one of the key officers in the operation. He would lead one of the attack columns. He would fight in the narrow streets of the lower town. And when Arnold was wounded, Morgan would take command. But that moment is still a little ahead of us. See, the Americans knew they could not take Quebec by siege. They just didn't have the artillery. They definitely didn't have the supplies, and they were running out of time. So Montgomery and Arnold agreed on a very bold plan. A coordinated assault on the lower town during a snowstorm. The storm would hide their movements. The darkness would confuse the defenders. The narrow streets would neutralize British cannons. It was risky. It was desperate, but it really was the only chance they had. Montgomery wrote one more letter to Janet before the attack.
Should fate be against me, remember that I fall in the cause of my country.
Sadly, those words would become tragically prophetic. Because in a matter of days, in the heart of a blizzard, everything these men had sacrificed, every mile of frozen wilderness, every starving march, every desperate letter home would come down to a single night. One storm, two columns, and a British cannon waiting in the dark. The march to Quebec was over, but the battle was about to begin. If this story has pulled you in, and I hope it has, please subscribe to Historical USA so you don't miss it. And if you want to support the channel, share the video with someone who loves American history. And I will see you in part 2 of the invasion of Canada.